living behind the bark of trees and detritus on the ground, but they love beehives more than anything else. And you've got to be careful because not so much in the hill country, but if you live in a place with wet, dark, sandy soil, blackland soil, they can, yeah, that's more conducive to hive beetles. They'll get desiccated because they crawl out of the colony in the larval stage and they pupate in the ground. So the more trouble they have getting down in the ground to pupate, the fewer adult beetles emerge. But if you live in an environment where you have wet, sandy soil, like around Navasota, where we do most of our queen production, they can just devastate a colony almost overnight. They aggregate in the hive, so they release an aggregation pheromone, and suddenly you get thousands of beetles in your hive, and they start laying eggs in the brood and the pollen. The larvae hatch out, defecate everywhere, turn everything into a slimy mess. So they are my public enemy number one. I think they're more of a problem than varroa mites, because my bees are naturally tolerant of varroa mites. All right, so anyway, a feeder. Let's see if we can. Laura, may I get a feeder from you?
A block feeder?
Yeah.
You take out both corks?
Okay. Miss Weaver, do you take out both corks?
No.
No, just the
Candy in.
Just
Okay. So if you're gonna feed a colony with a in-hive feeder, one of the things you want to do is you want to put something down in the feeder to keep the bees from drowning in the syrup that you put in there, right?
Yeah.
So little bits of wax are great, okay?
Peanuts. Pack of peanuts. That's
Yeah.
That's
Same
a
sort of stuff you
that
put in your
plastic.
smoker fuel.
That's
Yeah.
bone.
Bone. Yeah. That's a deer that died. Dog
Drug it up.
reduced it to rubble. So I'll be right back with the syrup. But we really don't need to do that. You can do that at the end of the lesson. But basically, you set it up like this. You fill it with syrup. This colony is not really strong enough to need a full feeder. Maybe half a feeder of syrup for this one. All right. But it made it through winter without any intervention.
Those little beetles, how do they get from one place to the other? They
Fly. They fly. Yeah. Now let's come around the corner over here and we'll look at a top bar hive. Okay, so this is another colony that illustrates that my bees typically don't require a lot of beekeeper intervention to survive and thrive, okay? So this colony overwintered, again, without any manipulation, without any supplemental feed or anything else. You couldn't, you could crawl underneath that hive and look up early this spring and couldn't see any bees at all.
Yeah, honey, they got a comb.
But they made it.
Down, see?
See if you look down underneath it, top bar hives are a little tricky if you're a beginning beekeeper, but we'll see if we can get into this one. If they start erupting, then we'll probably just move on because we're pretty close to the store here.
I want somebody to help you at the other end.
Yeah, it's just, this was made by a guy in San Antonio who didn't understand that
Square.
wood swells when it gets
Yeah.
wet. Okay, yes, sir.
So what's
All right.
got a screen?
Pardon me?
I was gonna say it's just open down there.
Mm-hmm.
There's some pest ants.
Yep, they're ants. Bees live in conjunction with all kinds of creatures. Most of the time, it's no big deal.
The ants don't bother them.
Sometimes they can. In the hot, dry summertime in Texas, that's when ants can be more of a problem than any other. So the thing you have to worry about with top bar hives is that sometimes the bees don't get comb built. So do you remember what I said? The honey flow hadn't really started.
That's not a
Okay.
beetle, is it? That's a
This is
piece
the
of wax
spot.
or something.
If you look at this top bar, what we've got here is we've got bees festooned from the top bar, but there's not really comb built there yet, right? Because it takes a lot of energy to build comb, and they haven't done on a honey flow. There's a hive beetle to enable them to
Yep.
to do that. If we go over another comb or another top bar, then we probably are going to get into comb. But again, they don't always build comb in top bar hives the way they're supposed to. You can get a lot of brace comb between top bars. But one of the cool things about these is that sometimes you get to see what bees will do on their own inside a hollow tree. I got to move 2 of these because that's not built on the top bar either. See how they built it crossways? If you look down in there, the comb's not actually built along the top bar.
Oh, yeah.
So if you start a top bar hive, you've got to constantly go in it and reinforce that they orient things correctly, cut things loose, okay? And I didn't go to that trouble with this one. I just let them do it on their own. And as a consequence, they've done what bees do, and they just do it in their own way. So I'm not sure we're going to be able to lift one of these top bars out of here. I was
So the
hoping I
best
could.
thing to do is to just get the one with the cone.
It's
with
it's
the-
easy. It's easier that way.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you got to spend
lot
a lot of time coming back in and cutting things loose and enforcing the correct spacing. And
Why do people prefer this kind of pattern?
well, a lot of people think that it's cool, and it kind of makes honey harvesting a different experience.
They got a lot of comb on the bottom though.
Oh yeah. It's part of why this is tricky to lift out of there, is because I got to do 2 or 3 at once.
Yeah, probably goes all, that may be one that goes all the way through.
Yeah, it's coming up on this one, too.
Wow.
Yeah, they're hanging down.
Some of them are a lot paler than others.
Whoa.
Oh, a bunch of them fell out.
Yeah. And do you hear that sound? Those are bees that are irritated with us. They're going like, why are you messing with us?
There's some larvae there that are fixing to
I
hatch.
think I
Okay,
see
so
the queen
drones,
right
you
there.
see drones
I
here?
see the queen. She's right there.
You see Queen?
Yeah,
Where?
she's right there.
Where?
She just went in. She just went in there. Like she
Okay.
was there.
Well, I believe you. She may be there. That's another thing about top bar hives, is they're a little bit harder to
She didn't
do
have
things
any-
with,
Yeah.
because you really can't twist the comb around. But do you see drones? Can you see the larger bees with the great big eyes and the blunt
Like that one right
abdomen?
Yeah.
That's a baby drone, right?
Oh, okay.
here.
hold that one.
Looks pretty big.
Okay, that just emerged. See how it's pale? Here's an older drone.
See if somebody else wants to see it
They're
down.
big.
And of course, drones are fun because you can put them down your friend's shirt and they won't sting them. But they will leave them pretty excited. All right,
Is
so
that a drone right here? That one?
yes. Okay,
Yeah, you
since
can tell the difference.
this young man thought he saw the queen, we're going to try to
Afraid of pushing.
run her out of there. See if
Now we got it. There we go.
If you have one hive, a box top is stacked on top of another one, will the queen just go back and forth between those 2 boxes to lay eggs, or will she fill up the first box first and then move up to the second
Well,
store?
that's a really good question. It's all about thermoregulation, right? So in the early springtime, she's probably going to move into that top box first, just because means that they won't have a lot of head space to keep warm while they're rearing brood.
I'm confused about that. So I thought the bottom was the brood box, and then the next one was where they store their
Honey?
honey.
Well, that's the way it'll end up in the summertime.
Okay.
But as they move through winter, what they'll do is the cluster, well, not always, but some colonies, the cluster will move up as they consume honey. Okay? And as the cluster moves up, that's where the queen will begin laying too. I don't know whether that was a queen you saw or not.
But you can't get the honey out of the second hive because they'll be laying eggs in there. She'll be laying eggs in there, right? So you have to put the super in there and put the extruder.
You may not have to. It's
So
all about managing the colony correctly and letting the bees do what they want to do and encouraging them to do it your way. And now we're going to go look at some managed colonies in Langstroth equipment. We're going to compare how we can do things in those hives to this. I don't think that was a queen you saw. If it was, she's escaped me. Okay? Which is you know, entirely possible.
It was the one that I saw didn't have any wings, and it didn't really have any stripes on it either.
Didn't have any wings, huh?
Or stripes. It didn't look like it had stripes.
That's dangerous. Well,
See, they don't have any
that sounds like deformed wing
Wait,
virus.
is that her
What?
right there?
Where?
I think you're seeing part of that yellow.
No, there was a...
I think you're seeing a drone. That's what you're seeing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
Anyway,
The queen's a little bit longer than
we'll
the
move.
dog.
We'll move along. All right, we'll try to put this down in there so that it fits back together more or less like they had it, with the exception of this drone comb that I knocked off. And you'll see